Well, hello, good afternoon, and thank you. You could have caught the early train, so I really do feel honored that with your presence here. I'd also like to ask for your sympathy and cooperation, because I have just 25 minutes to describe the biggest shift in human consciousness since the Middle Ages. That's pretty big. So again, your understanding, all I can do is just flash through in that 25 minutes, the highlights only. You'll be seeing words on the slides, which I presume you'll get from the organizers. My intention is to give you a very quick overview of just how big this shift is, and ask you not to expect to come away being a regenerative expert, okay? We'll talk a bit more about that later. And the other cooperative aspect is I would like you to leave your tourism bubble for a while. You've just spent the last 2-3 days, I think, just talking mostly about issues around tourism, and we can tend to get a little cloistered. I'm going to take you out of that into the context of tourism so that you understand why this shift in consciousness is important, why it's happening, and how it's going to potentially affect the way you approach tourism. So very quickly, I'm going to look at why this new term has appeared in the tourism community. We're actually a little late to the scene. Many other sectors have been talking about regeneration longer than us. We'll go briefly into what it might mean and what it will imply. So why regeneration now? Well, this is no disrespect to all of the efforts being made to ensure that we are, quote, sustainable, that is, we can endure as the way we work on the planet, the way we live on the planet, and the way we do tourism. The reality is it's not working. And then I'll go into why is it not working. It's not because we're not putting enough effort in, although in some quarters that's true, but there is a fundamental flaw underneath all of our efforts that's getting in the way. And then I'm going to try and give you some indication of what humanity is actually being asked to do. So very quickly, sustainability is not enough. And how do we know that? Well, right now we're living on the planet as human beings. We're extracting resources, making things and selling things, et cetera, but we're using up the equivalent of 1.7 planets in terms of resources to do that. And by 2050, we'll need 3 planets if we're going to be acting within our means. Well, I haven't seen any other planets or even asteroids floating in our direction to fill the gap. So it's not enough. Not only are we over-extracting, if you like, overusing what we have, or not using it as intelligently as we could, our planet is also showing the vital signs that it's not well. They're flashing red. You may have heard of the 9 planetary boundaries, which the Stockholm Resilience Institute has identified as being the boundaries which we cannot cross in terms of things like water usage, emissions, plastics, etc. And we are blasting our way through those boundaries. And just recently, the World Wildlife Forum came up with their new Living Planet report. We've lost 75% of our species on this planet in the last 10-15 years. So that's serious. Coming home to tourism briefly, again, we are also living beyond our means, as it were. This is a very important report that was put together by the Travel Foundation in 2030. I'd like to think all of you are aware of it. If you're not, then do have a look. Basically, it was focusing very much on emissions and what we needed to do as a sector to reduce our impact. But again, this graph said it all. The green lines going up are showing projected growth. The red line going down after COVID, you can see the dip of COVID. The red line going down is how we have to reduce the amount of carbon that we're pulling into the atmosphere. And I've put the big question mark in the middle of that for 2 reasons. One, it's basically, how are we going to deal with this enormous gap between what we're doing right now and what we need to do? And secondly, what I call cognitive dissonance. You go to these tourism events and you hear about growth in 1 minute and the need to be sustainable the next. And frankly, those two ideas right now do not fit. Outside of tourism, there is a general awareness. And by the way, I have to get the bad news out first, all right? It does get better. It's important, but you have to bear these things in mind now. Whether you like them or not, we have to face them. We're experiencing what the scientists, this is a report from the Carbon Institute, call the Great Unraveling. In other words, all of our systems are starting to unravel at the same time. And they've identified 11 items that we need to look more closely at or need to be dealing with, problems we need to be facing and dealing with. And I want you to look at that and think about this. Why is it that our way of thinking encourages us, and in fact habituates us to producing lists, right? So here we have a nice set of lists, separate items which all need to be looked at and problems that need to be solved. And it's that separation into these different topics. That's how we managed to have a COP on climate for 20-odd years, and only recently a COP on biodiversity. The two didn't meet, the experts didn't meet, they didn't talk to each other. And yet it's clearly obvious that you cannot talk about climate unless you talk about the land and the water and the animals and the plants and what's happening there. And now we understand that it wasn't just carbon in the atmosphere that caused the problem. It's because we've been degrading most of the planet. 40% of our land is degraded. We've been cutting down the trees. It's trees that make the rain. It's a bit late in the game to figure that out, but it is being figured out now. So we have, the other tendency we have in our culture is to come up with a new label, a new title, something new we can start to talk about. So the last word on this was, it's now not just 11 crises, we are all a polycrisis. Because there's, again, that glimmer of understanding that they are all completely interrelated and interdependent, and they're starting to have a compound effect one on the other. But that word isn't enough, actually. There's another word to describe the situation we're in, which is perhaps even more explanatory and helpful, and that is we are in what's called a meta-crisis. Underneath all that diversity of problems, if you like, we can start to now identify what is the root cause of those problems. Because they are all reflecting the way that we have been trained, educated, conditioned to see our world and how we learn to make sense of it. And that's what is the true source of the problem we're in. So I love this phrase. It wasn't mine. It was from a lovely cosmologist scientist called Jude Kerrivan, who said, a meta-crisis, which means that deep-rooted crisis, actually calls for a metamorphosis, a metamorphosis. And I think you all did this at school. Caterpillars start off chewing along a leaf or a twig, eating their way through life until they get sleepy and go to sleep and form a cocoon. And it's during that process that goes on inside that cocoon that the butterfly emerges. Now, the caterpillar could have just gone out and had wings attached, but it wouldn't have worked, all right? Now, that's what we're doing at the moment. We're trying to attach wings to a caterpillar in our heads. We're trying to fix problems with new solutions. That isn't enough. We need to change at the deepest and most fundamental level who we are, how we relate to each other, how we relate to the world, how do we relate to nature, etc. That is the level of change. In science, it's called a phase change. And what that means is once you have changed that way, once you have transformed, you can't go back. All right? That's really important. You can't go back because now you're a butterfly, and you can fly anywhere, and you can do all kinds of wonderful things. Many people right now, myself included, know that we're at that point in history when we are changing, or we have the option to change from caterpillars to butterflies. And I know you all like to travel, and I think being a butterfly would be a better way to see the world. Okay. So there is at the bottom, it says, this is going to involve a paradigm shift. And I've introduced this word because it's being used a lot right now. Everyone's talking about having a paradigm shift. They changed their clothing. You know, they went on a diet. It was a paradigm shift. That is not a paradigm shift, okay? A paradigm shift means you can't go back. There's no going back once you've made this. It's all about really systems change. And there's lots of paradigm shift is literally the way we change how we see or make sense of the world. I'm going to spend a few seconds on this because it's important. There are quite a lot of different words we could use interchangeably with paradigm. There's mindset, worldview, that's the collective way that we see. We sometimes talk about we're changing the story, the narrative of our time, or our frame. I love this quote from Donella Meadows because she says, you really begin to understand a paradigm and how it works when you're trying to have a communicate with someone else and you haven't a clue what they're saying or you just don't understand. You realize that someone is seeing the world very differently to you. Now I'm going to throw up an image to show you how our brains, if you like, the way we look at the world, every one of us sees the world differently. We're all born in different places at different times, educated by different parents, in a different system, whatever. We all are seeing a very different version of the world every time. None of us sees it exactly the same. But just to illustrate that, this is quite used by psychologists. I'll throw up an image quickly and I'll take it away, and you'll tell me what you saw, or at least I'll ask you what you saw. Hands up the people who saw a duck. Okay. Hands up the people who saw a bunny rabbit. Fewer. And how many of you saw both and went back and forth? Oh, you're a really intelligent bunch. Okay. All right, I'm going to take that idea and say, all right, how do we see the world? How do we see tourism? I would argue that this is how we see tourism. Because this is the diagram we all study in school of how our industry works. And it works because we can put things in boxes. You don't need to read the small letters. All I want you to do is see the boxes and the arrows. Because this is our understanding of tourism as an industry made up of functions, geographies, services, etc., each one linking to the other one in some seemingly terribly orderly way. But tourism is not an industry in that sense. Tourism actually is an intelligent, well, sometimes intelligent, it's a network. It's a living network of individuals, individual businesses, individual places that work together somehow in a beautiful way, because look, we're a multi-trillion-dollar network when you look at it all together, but it certainly does not look like that. But that's how we manage it, as if it looked like that. Do you agree? Am I speaking? Okay. So what's happening now is there is a fundamental shift happening outside of tourism. This isn't something you can control, manipulate, or what have you. This is happening in our world today. Is our paradigm of humanity and the people on the planet is changing in different ways at different paces and so on, because the assumptions about how the world works are changing. I'll give you some examples. These are examples of paradigm shifts that have happened in the past. When Copernicus showed that the sun does not go around the Earth, but the Earth goes around the sun, that you probably did that in history. You know, that caused a complete revolution in the beginning of science, all right? That had huge dramatic impacts. And an assumption right now that has underlined, if you like, the Industrial Revolution, is that we live on a dead rock in an empty cosmos. Well, it's not empty, there are other bits and pieces out there, but essentially it's an inanimate rock in a dark and empty place that nothing cares. And that reality is all about the things you can touch. And there are objects out there. that you can separate. Modern science, contemporary science, post-war science all says, uh-oh, it's not a subject, it's not an object. This is an illusion. This is all energy and information. So I'm not going to go into too much science, but I'm trying to give you an idea of just how things have been turned upside down. We've assumed in the Western world, especially as colonialists, that ours is the only way of seeing the world, all right? Now what's happening is because of travel, because of the internet, because of connectivity, we're bumping up against a large number of people around the world who don't see it the way we do in the West. They have a fundamentally different perception of how the world works. But this is just to give you an idea. So we have, for example, instead of living in a universe, there is now this recognition that we live really in a pluriverse. And this beautiful quote from the Zapatistas in Mexico, where they say, many worlds are walked in the world. The world that we want is a world in which many fit. And you're seeing right now politically about this notion that one group seems to think it's the only way of seeing the world. You're seeing paradigms tearing each other, or not separating, right in front of our very eyes every night on TV, I would argue. So Einstein did get it right. He said, the world we created is the product of our thinking. And what I'm saying is, if we're in trouble, it's that we're seeing it inaccurately. It's a flawed way of understanding how the world works. And until we change that, then we're not going to get it right. And that's why I'm spending time with you today, because in tourism, we're not going to get tourism right unless we can start to see tourism differently. And another famous scientist I really respect is Gregory Bateson. In the 40s, he really put it so succinctly. We see the Earth as a machine. It's made up of bits and pieces, all working according to Newton's laws, with billiard balls going all over the place that can be moved by an external force, et cetera, when in actual fact it is a living planet. All right, this planet is constantly changing. It's adjusting to its environment. It's adjusting to the fact that we have moved further away from the sun. It's adjusting to whatever might be coming in its direction. But it also is adjusting internally to what we're doing on it, what every single living thing is actively doing. So until we understand how nature works, and that's where all, again, the most advanced new ideas coming out of evolutionary biology are really helpful. Until we can understand how nature works, we're not going to be able to fit in. So at the moment, we're in between two stories or two paradigms. The dominant system, which is dominant in the Western world, since, as I said, the Middle Ages, when Copernicus did his thing and talked about the sun not going around us, and the beginning of science and the beginning of so-called rational observation, measurement, reducing things to the smallest parts, all of that way of seeing the world that underpinned the Industrial Revolution, it was incredible. It produced so much wealth, so much progress. We're all beneficiaries of that, but it only took us so far, and that system has reached its zenith. Partly because all of the science is now proving, as I said, it's not the way things really are, and that is in a state of decline. And a new system is emerging. It's struggling to be born. And this concept of regeneration is part of that, because regeneration is about understanding it's based on how living systems work, not on how machines work. And so there are some of us, jumping ahead with that, others being very resistant. You're seeing a lot of resistance right now up to this degree of change, because it changes everything. And if it's changing everything, you can't control it. So what is the nature of that difference? Well, as I said, fundamentally, the old way of seeing the world is a machine that I can measure. You know how much we like to measure things? We can describe it in great detail. We can also take it apart, all right? But supposing it's a living system, like a frog, what happens when you try to understand a frog by taking it apart? you kill it, right? You can't do the same with living systems that you can do with machines. You have to learn to observe, you have to learn to sense, you have to have a relationship with that living system, whether it's your pet dog, your boyfriend, your partner in business, the institution you work with. That is a living system. Everything is a living system because humans are involved in that. So we need to understand how living systems work. And once we change that way of seeing and wake up and realize it's all alive, it's all constantly moving, it has enormous potential. Life wants to evolve, it wants to become. This is the positive side of this story. Okay, I did all the negative stuff at the beginning, because this opens up so many opportunities for us. But once we change the way we see, then it changes our values. Once you can see the living world as not just an external resource that you can pluck from and take from and manipulate, and it doesn't matter. I mean, there was a scientist back in the Middle Ages, Bacon, no, it was Descartes, I think. He liked to take animals and what's the word, to cut them apart. What's the word I'm looking for? Thank you, someone's up, thank you. Thank you, Karen. Dissect. And they would scream in agony. And he said, oh, that's the mechanics just squeaking. That's exactly what he said. Because for him, it was a machine. And you've been taking that consciousness essentially right the way forward. Just recently in the UK Parliament, they only recently, 10 or 15 years ago, passed a law that said animals are sentient. That's only 15 years ago. That shows you how slow change can take place. But once you see all things as alive, once you see that you are a part of that, we are animals, we are alive. The trees, the animals that live in the forest are relatives. I'm now talking indigenous language, because they have never lost that connection. Then our values change, and when our values change, then our behavior change. And you cannot really get deep change unless you go through all of that. So how do they differ? I'm going to go to this really quickly, because I've only got 2 minutes left, and that's not going to work. You see, when I get up here, I get so excited. All right. So you'll have all these slides, and you'll see it. So just don't worry about reading all this. But I've identified ways in which a dead system is different from a living system, and how this is coming out into 2 stories. And I'd like you to take the slides and just read this for yourself, because once you start seeing these cues, you'll start thinking differently, all right? So you want to take a picture, you can, but if you see me afterwards or write to me, we'll make sure you get all the slides as well. But this is exactly where we are in our journey right now. This is why we have to move from being what is essentially an extractive economy of this set of resources, these inanimate resources, to becoming a generative economy. And you can't get there from the left side to the right side, no matter how hard you try, unless you invest in this paradigm shift. All right? Unless you invest time understanding what is this different way of seeing. So this is why I'm cautious about anyone that says I'm a regenerative destination or a regenerative business and hasn't done that serious work. They're deluding themselves, all right? This is going to take us all a while to do. But I am encouraging you to go down the journey, because it's going to open up so many possibilities for you. So regeneration is that paradigm shift. It is a process, and it's what life does. Life is constantly regenerating itself. Life is constantly creating the conditions for all life to thrive. Now think of your business. Now think of your children. Now think of yourself. What action do I take that creates the conditions for those around me to flourish and thrive? If you come away with nothing else from this presentation, and I'll have to go even faster, then I do want you to remember that. This is what regeneration is all about. Don't try and codify it too quickly. Just keep going back to that idea. How do we create the conditions for life to thrive? Are my actions conducive to someone else being healthier and growing, right? Now, I put these slides up because I'm showing you these changes are happening in agriculture from an industrial system that is actually life-depleting right now. The food we're eating is infinitely less nourishing than it was 30 years ago. There's something wrong with that system. It is not creating the conditions for life to thrive. There are all these other features of that system you can study. Regenerative agriculture said, no, we have to create the conditions for life to thrive, and to do that, we have to have healthy soil, because in the soil are all of those healthy microorganisms that ensure those nutritious elements are there. It's a very different system. It's very localized, it's very bottom-up, it's very designed by the ecology. The same is happening in hospitality. We're moving from a machine story, which is this kind of tourism, global, extractive, price competitive, standardized, top-down decision-making, vulnerable, to a living system. 95% of businesses in Europe alone, let alone the rest of the world, are small, medium-sized enterprises. They don't need to grow like an airline, all right? They need to be sensitive to the environment where they're growing up. They are generating value. They're enabling their neighbors in the community to flourish as well as them, et cetera, et cetera. So there are 4 key features that I want to also have you take away and think about that are associated with regeneration. The first one I've already mentioned, but I'm going to repeat and repeat and repeat. Life creates the conditions for life to thrive. And the example here is of the acorn. It's just a seed. There's thousands of acorns often come from one oak tree in the autumn. And then it will fall in the ground, and many of those seeds will not survive, but there'll be compost for other seeds. And seedlings will come up, and they'll start to grow. And eventually, that tree will stop growing. The tree at the bottom is a fully mature oak. It might be increasing its girth, as they say, its trunk, like I am. Many of us are. But it doesn't get any bigger. I've been trying to do that too, and it's not working. The point is, however, what grows? A mature oak tree is capable of being the habitat for several thousand species of other life forms. So the more it matures, the more it grows, the more it is creating the conditions for other life to thrive. So think about your business. How could your business grow in a way that it creates opportunities for other businesses and people to thrive? That's the fundamental difference of regeneration. It's about making a contribution to the bigger system of what it is a part. So that means the most important first step in tourism right now is we redefine growth, because nothing in nature grows forever. Otherwise, we'd all have very, very tall oak trees and we couldn't get around at all. All right, something in that system, it corrects itself at some point and it stops growing up. It grows in complexity, but not in size. How could we in tourism start to build vibrant, flourishing communities where tourism is delivering far, far more benefit to the communities in which it serves? It's growing in quality and it's growing in benefit, and it's building the capacity of all the people that come in contact with it, because again, that's the major thrust in nature. So rethink growth and competition. Serve the whole. Everything in nature is part of something else. We're all systems within systems within systems. I've got about 2 more minutes. Am I okay? He said I could relax. Well, that was dangerous because I might take another half an hour, so I promise you I will. But essentially, everything in nature, and you know this in yourself, you're made up of trillions of cells. I think it's something like 30 trillion cells, all of different kinds. Plus, you've got all those microbes that are hanging out in your bodies, right? So we're a walking community. We're not individuals. But this is how nature works. So again, how does each one of those elements, those parts, those subsystems contribute to the health of the whole? Every one of my elements right now is trying to figure out how to, process whatever it was that I ate or drank last night, I suppose. But, it's keeping me healthy. I'm standing up just about talking with you. But it's a complete system you're looking at in action here. How do we create the enabling conditions? How do we, as I said, create the conditions for everyone else to be healthy and to thrive? These are so much more inspiring objectives than meeting some numerical target. Would you not agree? You want every one of your customers, every one of your guests to leave your place feeling bigger and better about themselves and the world than they did when they arrived. But the same is true of your employee turning up in the morning to be on the early morning shift. How do we start to rethink what is success? And the last thing, and this is really important as all this cameras go up, is you cannot do regeneration at large. Life takes place in a place. So it's this idea now is we start to go back into our communities where we're rooted. And the beautiful thing about the hospitality part of tourism is that it is rooted in place. If you're a hotelier or a restaurateur, for example, you are rooted right there. You can't go anywhere because the customer comes to you. And if you're not there, well, business is done. But to me, this is important because so many other industries have no affiliation with place at all. And yet, when you look at nature, everything takes place in a different ecosystem, a place where the sun shines on the ground differently to another place. So this is what brings out that unique difference, that unique point of difference that has been traditionally important to us. So my last slide, and as I say, forgive me for covering a lot of territory very quickly, but I really did want to bring home the fact that this is a wonderful opportunity for us. It's going to take all of us learning together what this new way of thinking looks like and how we can apply it into our businesses. I believe that if we do, we will be enjoying more prosperity and stability than we've had in the past. And it doesn't in any way undermine all of our sustainable efforts heretofar. Some people have tried to position this as anti-sustainability. It is not. All of those practices are essential, but now we're elevating them to something which I think is more aspirational, inspirational. So, last slide. The living system paradigm is new, but it ain't going away. This is the way we see reality today, and I can't see whatever else couldn't replace it. Take your time, please, to understand it. Don't expect to know everything about it in one course. Use multiple ways of knowing and sensing. This is what one question came up today. How can we introduce more measurement into regeneration? Right? Because we have to prove that it makes a difference. I'm saying the minute you do that, you're slipping back into that old paradigm of seeing bits, pieces, numbers, reducing them to numbers, and stopping using those other three ways of knowing which indigenous people have never lost. So if you walk into a forest with an indigenous person, they immediately feel and sense how healthy it is. But a mother knows this. A mother has a child, comes down to breakfast, and you could tell they're off color. You're all how many parents? You know when your kids are off color, right? Anna? They're not right. You can tell. All right? You know that. Now, what are you doing? You are sensing that they're not well. How do you know that you know that? You don't necessarily know how you know that, right? But you know it. So the point is, what we have lost by all of this emphasis on things and measurement and data is we've lost those other three ways of knowing. Here, our gut tells us many things. Some would say it's their intuition, but there's a relationship between our gut and our heart, we feel something is wrong. And we can use our physical senses to add more information in there. But we don't necessarily, as a mother, go immediately for the thermometer. We go for the thermometer when we have to go and see a doctor, right? Because if they don't have a temperature number, they won't actually suggest you've got a problem. So I use that as does that make sense? I hope so. Because I think that's one of the things that we've just really got to explore in our sector. So please don't rush either to codify, to package, and certify. Anyone who's certifying regenerative tourism at this stage, I think is premature. That's a kind way of saying it. All right? I'm being generous. Because we're just too early into this. It's going to take a long time. And more importantly, we want people to know when they walk into a community and they can sense that this is a different place. They can sense that people are joyful and working together and being creative. All right? They don't need the numbers to prove it. So start and live with the questions. And this is Rainer Rilke. Have patience with everything, including me, that's unresolved in your heart, but go away wanting to learn more. So thank you very, very much for your patience. I'm sorry it's so fast. Thank you.
Stay here, stay here. Thank you so much. Thank you.
Thank you.
More and more. Woo. When did we have that last at ITB? I'm not sure. Anna, we're running out of time, but maybe just one question. One question.
Sorry.
What would you say, and I think you've partly answered, what would you say to all the companies that are trying to rush into the regenerative tourism space these days? What would you tell them? What's the piece of advice that you have to those companies?
My advice would be not to rush, obviously. Please, because you've been missing out on so much. If regeneration becomes it's used as a trend to give you competitive advantage, you've lost the plot. I believe that you will be more competitive when you really sink into this. But if you do it for that reason, you're off on the wrong path.
Okay. Thank you so much. Anna Pollock, please.